and welcome to today's A-Team Group webinar on establishing and enabling data democratization with trusted and well-governed data. My name is Sarah Underwood. I am an editor here at A-Team Group, and I'll be moderating the webinar. Our expert speakers today are Francis Wenzel, co-founder and CEO at TIXSmith, Sayori Fortanis, co-founder and CEO at S&P Global Market Intelligence, Sumi Shin, CDO Data Enablement at Northern Trust Asset Management, and Gary Manser, Head of Data Governance at Vanquis Bank. I'll be asking the speakers to introduce themselves in just a moment, but first a little bit of information to help you use the platform that you're working on more easily. To the right of the screen, you'll see a panel. It's a Slido panel, and there you'll see Slido polls and questions. We're running 3 polls through the webinar, and I'll let you know when they're coming up. Please do vote, as it helps to give us an idea of your thoughts on the subject. And we'll also be taking your questions throughout the webinar. Please just add them as soon as you'd like to, and we'll get to as many as we can. We'll answer them during the Q&A so that we can hopefully, as I say, get to as many as we can. So enough of me, and over to our speakers. So Francis, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your interest in data democratization. Hi, you're on mute.
This is going to happen again and again.
You're fine, don't worry.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks everybody for joining the seminar. Francis Wenzel, co-founder of TIXSmith. I've been in the data business since the mid-'80s, which dates me a little bit. And I remember starting and actually shipping out data on floppy disks. And I find that even today, trying to find data, access data, and work with it is not easy, because at the core, the data is not easy to expose. And that's actually something that we're trying to solve at TIXSmith. So very, very important for me personally and for our firm, data democratization, and how do you make the data more usable and making it more accessible.
Thank you. Coming to you, Sayori, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sayori Fortanis, and I had the product management team here in North America for the S&P Market Intelligence Enterprise Data Management product, or EDM for short. And very similar to Francis, have been in the industry for over 20 years around data as well, and specifically, with this the EDM product, S&P really trying to help with the data wrangling and then making sure that it's done properly and at scale on the cloud.
Thank you. And Sumi.
I work for Northern Trust in the Chief Data Office, enabling data governance, quality, and privacy policies, and making sure that our implementations are compliant in those areas. And definitely have a couple of floppy disks lying around in my garage as well.
I remember them too. I'm sure I have some too. Gary, I know you're too young, you won't have any.
Oh, I have some too, unfortunately. Yeah, I still remember my ZX81, but that's really going back some. Yeah, I'm Gary Manser. I'm head of data governance at Vanquis Bank. Our journey for data democratization is really just starting. We're a company that's 19 years old, and we've got awful IT and data structures. So we've got data all over the organization on different servers in different places. And actually found out recently, if we access it through different tools, we get different answers. So I'm very interested to join this conversation and hopefully share some of the issues that we have.
Excellent. Thank you all very much indeed. Let's start with an audience poll. The question is, to what extent has your organization achieved data democratization? And while you answer the question, let me come to Francis to set the scene and talk a little bit about the extent to which capital markets participants have achieved data democratization.
Great, thanks. I find that at least in capital markets, which as far as data democratization goes, it's probably one of the verticals that is the most advanced, and we deal with every vertical, but it is extremely uneven. I mean, I looked up just for fun, it's like, what is the definition of democratization? And it is the action of making something accessible to everyone. ask some firms, they'll say, great, yes, all of our data is accessible. It's here. We've gone through projects. It's in one place. And do I need to go through somebody? Can I go to it directly? What are the controls that are there? And then you talk to a whole number of other firms. And even internally, if you want to get to your content, well, it is still in silos. It is very difficult to reach. So I'd say right now it is extremely uneven. It has served the purpose for most firms, but as there's more and more uses for data, thanks to the democratization of AI and machine learning, then we have to be able to do more with the content.
Okay, lovely. Sumi, what would you say here from a practitioner's perspective? What are you seeing in terms of development?
Yeah, I think we've spent a lot of money and resources recently in the last 3 to 5 years, building out the cloud platform and data infrastructure behind that. The sharing has been more cloud to cloud, or that is the goal anyway. And so the modernization of our applications, unraveling some of the black boxes that were in place for many years on getting the data ready for sharing is what we're currently working on. And I think a lot of the firms are doing the same. But one thing that I realized recently is that the data doesn't have to be physically all be in one instance of a cloud. There is cloud to cloud sharing that we're leveraging, especially with vendor products as well, because there's a lot of sourcing in and buying, purchasing of information that we marry our transaction and position data with. And so that's been very interesting to see. And so that's where I think a lot of the governance and quality and policy measures come in place.
Okay, thank you. May we see the results of the first poll, please? And Francis, coming back to you, would you like to comment? Is that what you might expect to see?
That is absolutely what I would expect to see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Carry on. Anything else?
Actually, what is interesting is actually if you look at the zeros. So nobody says the data is impossible to access, even like to no extent, to a large extent. I mean, it is pretty clear cut. I mean, you have some, it in most places, it basically just is functional enough, but that's not forward looking if you're just functional enough.
Yeah. For sure. Thank you very much indeed. And bringing you in here, Gary, could you talk a little bit, please, about the drivers behind the development of data democratization and the benefits of a successful program?
My turn to do it, Francis. I'll start muted this time. I think Francis started it anyway with his definition of democratization. I even struggled to get my teeth around the word. I think the benefit that we see is that data is actually available to all in the organization. We have various ways at the moment that data is put together through info path tools, through end user computing solutions, but people aren't always using that right data at the right time. So where we're looking to get to is that ability of, if you need access to it, and I'm always going to bring the privacy and the governance side to it, but if your role is one that needs access to the data, then we should be making it available to you. It is that to allow decisions to be made a lot quicker as well. We have a very limited analytical team. They do a fantastic job, but they can only build one model at a time. And they're being pushed for data all the time on various different things from our chairman down. He wants to know how many of our customers shopped in a particular store last week, and people need to go and find that information very, very quickly. We want to be able to get him to that position that actually there's something on his desktop, he can just key something in and it will bring it back for him. We can have confidence in the results and he can have confidence when he takes it out to the marketplace.
Okay, that's great. Sayori, where do you see the drivers here? Obviously, Gary's coming from a bank arena. Where did you see as you're out there in the market?
So yeah, as a vendor, absolutely, we see the same thing that Gary's talking about in terms of the ability to get that analytics and the access to the data. But of course, it has to be good quality data, right? So that's the most important part of it all. I mean, if we were to talk about at a high level, the business driver is still very much sort of search for alpha, whether it's in efficiency or actually training or investment opportunities, of course. And but I would add that another driver is this idea of empowering of a very diverse set of users across an organization to be able to access data in their terms with definitions that make sense to them, so that even though, you know, I may think of a data set as a technical, you know, UTC date, someone else might be thinking of it, oh, it's just a date. Someone else might be thinking this is a date of incorporation, right? So the idea that you can actually be very targeted to the diverse set of users accessing that data, I think, is an important aspect of it. Just as an example, though, having all of the governance and the tools and all of this that has been talked about to meet these business drivers sometimes is not enough if you are not able to scale to the kind of the demands of the size of data and the rate of change of data. So I think the successful companies, as the ones that we've seen needing and tackling data democratization, are going to be very sort of cloud first and cloud positive, cloud ready. And so, you know, of all of the customers that we've had so far in the past couple of years, even though we do offer an on-premises product, we have had none in the financial services sort of business actually wanting to do that anymore.
Wow, that's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And coming back to you, Sumi, can you sort of talk us through how capital markets participants can actually approach data democratization, and what are the key sort of steps they should take, imagining that's something they would really like to get going on, but not quite sure how?
I think initially when the project gets started, the data governance as well as quality policy, enterprise architecture and the project business teams and even operations. I feel like there's a lot of close partnership that's needed to get going on this. One, defining the information, but not spending and churning on the actual definition, but more identification of the data and where it's coming from is the focus that we've had, just so that to help with the project implementation versus the conceptual, logical discussions that sometimes happens with governance. And then there's a lot of quality measures and metrics that you want to put in place, because ultimately when you share and publish the information, you want it to match and reconcile back to what it was before. And that sometimes you don't allocate as much resource and time out of the gate, and we do spend a lot of time on that. And so from a project estimation, I'd like to work with the projects to kind of allocate enough time to make sure that that effort isn't rushed through, so that when you publish the information, again, like that it reconciles back to what it was and what it is published out to our clients.
Okay, that's great. Francis, can you add to that in terms of what people should be doing? How should they be doing, in what kind of order?
Absolutely. I mean, the data that we're working with and that firms are working with is usually data that's derived from their main activity. So it is going to exist. It is going to be in the organization. There's always a big challenge of making sure you have it all, because to the users, to democratize it and say, here, you first need to make it discoverable. You need to be able to provide, like, here's a list of all of the data that is available. Right? And you need to do that exercise in-house through a data wrangling, a data lake, or data centralization project. We've seen a lot of those to reflect what was said earlier that happened as part of a transition to the cloud. But the first thing is make sure you make it discoverable. People can find it. And then from there, how do they procure it? How do they ask to access the data? And not everybody needs to access the data the same way, depending if they're an analyst or if they're going to be plugging it into a back office application. Right? So you have to put yourself in the shoes of the users and confirm, how am I going to get that out there? And the data itself, it's not just the bits and bytes. It is also all of the conditions around it. Who has access to it? Do you need to cross-charge for it? Is it going to be an external user? Do I actually put a value on that? Am I sharing the content? So put yourself in the users. And we like to say to give the analogy of e-commerce. I mean, if you want to buy something, you don't have to call a store before anymore to say, oh, do you have this? And you go online, you see a list of products, you see the details of each, and this fits me, it has these fields, etc. Great, you can ask for it, and ultimately you can get it.
Okay, thank you. Sounds simple, but I think we're going to dive into some of the challenges next. But first, let's run another poll question amongst our audience, and it asks, what are the data challenges of data democratization at your organization? This time, you can tick as many of the items on the list as you feel are appropriate for your organization. So while you do that, let me come to Sayori to share her experiences of the data challenges of data democratization.
Yeah, I think I touched on everybody actually touched on this a little bit. There's the right balance between the wide and broad accessibility with the right controls and governance that put in place. I think finding that right balance that doesn't take away from the access, but also make sure that the data that is accessible to the right audience does come with the controls, the definition, the discoverability, as Frances was mentioning, right? You need to find it, you need to know that it's exactly what you mean. And when it comes to specifically, like when you drill into the data specific kind of guardrails that you might want to put, I think ensuring the quality of the data is an important aspect of it, and making sure that the quality definition for me may be different from Gary, or Sumi's and Gary's may be different, but both of them need to be validated and be enforced for their individual needs, and having the ability to kind of address different scenarios, I think is an important challenge that everybody's sort of facing. We have examples of customers having to basically have this idea of gold, silver, bronze copies of data, depending on what the audience is that's going to have to actually access that data. And that's a valid scenario, and we need to kind of embrace that level of diversity, I think.
Excellent, thank you. Gary, coming to you, I think you're near the beginning of this journey, so start right at the bottom and tell us the challenges from get-go.
I think some of the challenge is actually lies in undoing the sins of the past. So we've all looked at data silos, we've looked at certain teams owning certain parts of their data. And I know as an organization, we hold far too much data because we don't even have the gold, silver copies. We're right down to pieces of tinfoil at the bottom where somebody's taken a copy and tried to do something with it. So I think the amount of data that you're actually trying to look at and trying to find that golden source is always going to be an issue. The other side of that I see is also around access requests as well. And I know in the UK this happens a lot, but somebody new joins an organization, they get the access of the person that's been in the team the longest, and everyone suddenly has access to everything anyway, and we don't need to do data democratization because they've got stuff they don't need. But we're finding we're having to undo all of that and go back and take this user group out and take that user group out to actually start to get to that point that we can build the right places where we want people to look at data. The issue with that is it actually undoes some of the processes that are built on those old access groups. So I switch something off and somebody shouts at me the next day because their report hasn't run or their data's not available because actually I took their access away. So I agree with everything Sayori said, but I think there is that sins of the past that we've just got to accept that our data is not going to be great. We're not even at the point of looking at our data quality rules yet. We're looking at actually what data do we have? And I'll come back to that in a later question, but it is that understanding it's not going to be perfect. And there's some hard work to do, first of all.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let's see the results of the poll, if we may. Thank you. And Sayori, would you like to comment on those?
Yeah, so it's actually not surprising, of course, that limited ability understanding is the biggest problem. I think Gary was saying exactly that. It makes so having the ability to not just get the data to be the first of great quality, but understanding what the data is that you have, having really good metadata or description about the data in itself probably is a very, very first step. And I can kind of see why this is the most important one. But you can see actually too much or actually lack of governance are pretty high up there as well. Again, touching all of the points that I think Gary and I mentioned around the challenges. I think it it reflects what we see in the industry as well. One thing that I don't see too much, this idea of the lowest one around multiple copies. It's interesting that right now it is the lowest number. I think 3, maybe 5 years ago, and maybe in different industries outside of financial services, that might be a higher number. And it goes to show, though, the reason why it's probably low is because there has been a really large recognition by capital markets that data is a core asset, needs to be invested in, needs to have the oversight so that you don't actually end up with so many copies and investments of the same data all throughout.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, and thank you to our audience for voting. And having identified all the challenges, let's see what the solutions are. So if I may come back to you, Gary, to talk about how the challenges you've mentioned that Sayori began on, how can they be addressed to achieve trusted and well-governed data?
And I did say I'd come back to my last answer, and it actually links into that big red bar at the top of the screen that we were just talking about too. Our starting point is actually going to be building the first data catalog that we've had in the organization, and actually understanding what it is that we have, where it is, and what are we using it for. My team at the moment are doing a lot of work. We have databases, sitting on databases, and nobody's used them in 5 years. But nobody's actually going, do you know what, we should get rid of those. And that's where we're starting, is that whole cataloging piece, understanding what's held where, putting the governance piece over it. So making sure we've identified the owner, making sure we've identified appropriate stewards that can make the right decisions for us. But it's understanding what we have. Once we've got to that point of view, then it's then going and understanding what is that data actually being used for. Because as we start to understand our democratization journey, we want to start to build, going back to what Francis was saying earlier on, we want to start building that menu so people can go in and they can look at it. Actually, I just want to know the total spend yesterday compared to something that is in-depth, understanding how our customers are using a particular product in a particular way. So we're looking at that as well, looking at who's pulling what are they actually using it for. But I'm going to come back to the data catalogs where we need to start, because that's what takes that red bar away.
Okay, thank you. Sumi, in your experience, how can these kinds of problems be achieved and the outcome be some great data?
It's great to hear that we're all basically approaching it in a very similar fashion. I think a lot of firms, and our firm especially, has been working very diligently on cataloging the data at source, as well as all this hops in between. And in terms of contextualizing the data and looking at what it's used for, what we're going with is a report inventory as well. And so if we start with a source inventory and the report inventory and trying to map all the how the data traverses through it in between, we feel like that's kind of the quote unquote definition that we need for the users to go find and use that information. And the challenge has been, the teams have approached it more on a use case approach. It is really hard to do globally or and as an enterprise initiative. The funding is hard to find that way. And so managing the various project works, using a standardized way to collect the metadata, and making sure if there are duplicities anywhere, or we're having data multiply sourced and used, churned in a different way, that documentation exists so that people can go in and decipher what that is.
Excellent, thank you very much indeed. So what technologies can we apply here? So let me come over to you, Sayori, again. What types of technologies, tools, techniques, services, new techs, what helps?
Yeah, so I'll talk, and actually it's going to be a summary of everybody has been saying, and then I'll talk about 4 specific areas to focus on. So in no particular order, but so the data discovery aspect of it, being able to know what you have, I think is like a centralized data catalog, I think is a very important tool to have. The shared definition and the metadata, Sumi, that you mentioned, basically being able to actually document what the meaning of the various data sets are, prioritize them, and so forth. I think that's a second, so the data dictionary. So data catalog, the first one, data dictionary, the second one. A third one, of course, is going to be that once you know what the data is, you want to make sure that it's of the highest quality that you need it to be. And sometimes highest quality may not be gold, right? Like highest quality maybe silver, and that's okay. So being able to have the tooling and the ability and the rules to make sure that the data that you say it is actually, to the quality that you expect it to be. And then maybe the fourth one, which I would say is something that happens after, in a way, maybe the fourth one is something that comes a little bit after you being able to do the first three, which has to be this idea of being able to have full data lineage on each one of your data sets. So it's not good enough just to know, like, theoretically, this data could be derived from that. Well, look at an actual field in a report, right? Where does this data really come from? Do I have traceability? Do I know the provenance of this piece of data throughout? So I think if you can kind of have those 4 pillars or guardrails in place, then the accessibility and the democratization of all your data is going to be really successful, because you've put the right balance between governance and access that will make your business goals, basically your search for alpha, successful, would be my suggestion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lovely. Francis, over to you. What sort of texts and things are needed here to support it?
Actually, I'm going to feed off some of what Gary said earlier when he talked about having data sets that haven't been touched for years, as well as data living in silos. Yes, it lived in silos because applications lived in silos. It's a whole client server. I have my application. Here's the data that goes with it. It's in the same system where it is built just for that, and then oops, somebody else needs the same. Okay, what's the easiest? We copy it over, we try to give it access. That changed when the whole concept of cloud came about, where suddenly the idea of silos doesn't exist anymore. I mean, it can, conceptually, but everything is in one virtual place, meaning that if you need to put your data into a central location, to have it accessible. So as far as actual tools, again, move to clouds, the concepts of data lakes, data swamps, tools like Snowflake, Databricks, Redshift, that allow you to gain control of your data, gain control of the data pipelines too. Because you have data that sits in a database, great, it might be useful, but unless it's something that's updated with a certain frequency, then that data becomes stale and it's not going to be used anymore. So you want to identify those pipelines. And once you have that, you can build your tools. There's also tools, that's one of the new things that's what TIXMIT does, is we come in and we say, here's an end-to-end platform where if you have identified and your data is accessible, then it can point to it and give you all of the other pieces to make it easy to find, easy to request, put in all of the controls, because it is the same standard flow everywhere when you want to democratize the content. You just have to make sure it fits, it works for your data, it works within your environment, and that you've put in all of the controls and that you can actually manage those.
Okay, fine, thank you. Let's take a break, have some audience questions, and we do have quite a mix. And Sumi, if I could come to you with this one first. It says, we have a data democratization program, but it is not going well as we have so much data, so many silos, and so many different views on how data should be used, and it's tough to move forward. What does the panel suggest we do?
So, it depends on, how much data we're talking about and then what the complexities are, in making sure, componentizing it. But the approach that I've seen and that I like is starting small. I know it sounds very, cheeky, but if you start small with a specific product area and focus on making sure that that is defined well, that is shared well, and there's actually a use case for it, and then there's a bit of focus to get that going and getting that first productionized data nugget in place. If you're approaching it from the domain perspective, like making sure that your client data is what you focus on, or your account data is the next that you focus on. A lot of the capital markets, it's easier to focus on the securities pricing and information. Product, if you go into like the fund, the characteristics and whatnot, it's a little bit more complex perhaps because, there's a different way those funds may be configured or structured or modeled. But finding that nugget that you can focus on first, and maybe not working to agree on this is exactly how we're going to publish it, but more on this is how we're going to contextualize it for you. It's coming from this system in this context. And if you choose to use it, this is how you would interpret that. And not work, spending churning on trying to find the most perfect definition for it. I think has worked in many situations.
Great, thank you. And Francis, one for you, it's something you were talking about, it's about governance and controls, and it says, full support for governance, controls and accessibility. These are often seen as barriers though. Don't you think it is also key to actually show the power benefits of data to users to democratize it?
Yeah,
it sounds like somebody's feeling like they're a bit locked up wherever they are, they're not getting access to the data they want. How do you get that balance going?
Well, it's a very interesting question, because often the controls are not the ones that we think that are needed. You have a data set, can be small, can be large, and you want to control who gets access to what. You want to control if there's fields, who gets to see specific items. But if I go back to an earlier question, well, the question just before that talked about too much data, sometimes it's also how you package the content to offer it, right? So if somebody needs to access data that sits in a data set, if you're forcing them to take the full data set to look at it, or to take everything, then the controls are really more difficult to put in. If you can say, here, I've got this data set, I am able to package it where I have one data product. We really like the concept of a product, where you take your data and then you say, I'm going to express it this way for these users, that way for these users, package it accordingly. It might include more, it might include less, it might have the full universe, it might be limited. Those are also a whole number of control points that let you control who gets access to what, but also lets the user really get access to what they specifically need, as opposed to getting too much and trying to have to extract what they need out of that. And doing that means you're losing some control.
Okay, thank you. One for you, Sayori. It says, how can data managers build a business use case for data democratization?
Yeah, I think what we've seen very successful programs where there is basically out of finding the right use case and getting the funding to basically build out a democratization service has come with figuring out what are some of the core, some people call it reference data sets or data domains that are going to be extremely reusable and reshareable and that need to be that brings the most benefit to be shared. So I know, Sumi, you mentioned this idea of securities and parties and things like that. And I think, secure prices, maybe not as much, but securities, parties, which could be like issuers or, whatever sort of legal entities you're talking about, coming up with these reference data, core data sets and starting with building democratization or access to those data sets across all systems where that data could be available in everywhere, but at least it's coming from the right source with the right quality controls on it, is something that we found it to be successful, because it's a small scenario. It's not like we're not going to try to democratize everything. We're going to focus on and pick one or two, or even one. Actually, I wouldn't even say two, just pick one for first, right? Pick one and start with that one and figure out, because then you can show a lot of value right away, because once you have one good, let's say, security master, then almost everybody else will see the benefits of that, because all of their reports, all of their analytics, all of their accounting, everything is going to fall from there and be able to show value afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Gary, if you are going to put two questions together and they'll kind of come like one. And the first one says it's something we have touched on. So if you could just review it, it asks, this is something our organization wants to do. Could the panel talk a little bit about a good starting point? And the next one, we're a relatively small firm with limited data resources. Could a third party help with data democratization and to what extent? So starting points, third parties.
Okay, so starting with the third parties, yes, they can. We're actually using a third-party organization to provide us data governance as a service. So I've got a team of 3 that are looking at 4 parts of the organization, but actually all of the I was going to say grunt work, but that sounds awful. But all of the building the rules, actually understanding, scanning the data is done by a third party for us. They understand the tools already. We brought tools in to help us as part of our journey, but rather than have to learn how to use those tools, how to implement those tools, we're using this data governance as a service tool, and they're providing it all to us, and they package it, pass it all up, and I get a nice little dashboard that sits on my desktop that I can look at and go, I've got to go and concentrate here, concentrate there. So yeah, everyone talks about you need to buy the best tools in the market. We've named a few on here today. There's a number of data governance tools out there that will cost 7 figures. There's actually a better idea is go and let somebody else take that cost for you. By using the third party we're using, they actually buy their licenses in bulk. One of the tools I'm using, I needed 100 licenses. I saved 50% going to this firm because they need 1,000 licenses and they get a cheaper price. So yeah, definitely I'd start looking at the ability to use third parties to come and support. You're going to have to remind me the first part of the question though, Sarah, because I got a bit carried away.
That's okay. Best place to start.
I would go back to exactly what Sumi said and start small. We're starting with one of our transformation projects. I went into the organization, as we all do. I went in guns blazing. I'm going to do all of this, and then realized it wasn't going to happen because there was too much to get done. So I've now focused on one project. It's going to deliver a transformation for our organization. Francis will be pleased to know we'll be coming away from those silos and actually finally using the cloud properly, and actually building in Snowflake and Azure and all the good stuff that everyone else is doing. But I've started there because we've got to take our old data to make it fit the new world. So it gives me the perfect point, was just picking on that one project in the organization. Okay,
that's great. And Sumi, one last question for you. This is a rather sort of conceptual idea, I think is the answer to that one. And it asks, what level of costs are we looking at here for a large financial firm, and what return will we get on the investment? I think cost is a very difficult thing. So if you want to talk more about return on the investment, it might be easy to justify the costs.
So hard to go into actual like figures and all that stuff, but you know what, and this is very interesting to hear, like governance as a service. And one of the things that we're running into right now is democratized governance and quality policy implementation. So it used to be you run a governance program as an enterprise, and then you kind of all march and make sure all the metadata is collected in one place, quality is done in one place, and that was kind of the mantra for a little while. But what we're seeing is with the use case approach and having people have different targets, different you know, dollars associated with how the projects are run, I'm finding that perhaps like the metadata doesn't have to be all in one place. Not everybody has to be one team that collects this information, or quality measures can happen in various you know, architecture places. And so depending on, you know, how you want to or feel comfortable with the governance and quality and policy and these democratization implementations are run, it may be best to utilize what's currently budgeted and just making sure that ultimately you know where that nugget of information is, whether it's data or metadata, and inventorying that all together. And having that, you know, access to the metadata and the data in one place, I think, yeah, as a facade overall, I think that kind of reduces some of the budget that you might need to actually get this going. And so, you know, it's one idea. I'm not sure if what others might think about that, but just, you know, it's an idea out there.
Okay, let's have a quick word with our vendors, and Francis first. How, when you're talking to customers, can you explain the kind of return they're going to get?
Well, that's a very interesting question. There's a few ways to approach it. The first thing is there going to be any cost savings in the infrastructure and getting better content? And that's one way to calculate it and try to get a budget. What we usually find is the data democratization is driven by a need. And it's simple. There's new technologies, there's new things that you can do. And again, I've mentioned like machine learning, AI. There's actually also monetizing content, saying, here, I've got this subset of content, it is super useful internally, and I could actually get some money by selling that to peers, to others. There's use cases around sharing data. And what we found is usually those will be driving the budget to get the data democratization project started. But then once you get into the mindset that this data existed because it has a specific use, but by making it available, we've now found these additional uses, and here's how much we've been able to generate out of that, that allows you to go and accelerate your program, right? If you go onto our website or do a quick search, I mean, you'll see some of our customers boast of the savings that they have, and it varies. But some of them can be extremely big when you start talking about large compliance applications and others, where if you don't have the proper content at the right time, it can be extremely costly.
Sayori, what do you see out there in terms of sort of the return on the investment? Talk a lot about cost. What about the softer side of things as well, like decision making and so on?
Absolutely. I think there's definitely a cultural transformation that can come about that's a little bit less tangible in terms of benefits. But going back to, I'm a little bit, I'm agreeing a little bit with you, Francis. I think just thinking about democratization programs as cost savings, it doesn't get to the actual value proposition. I think you need to really think about back to the search for alpha driver that we talked about in the beginning, like if you really understand the value of data as your competitive advantage, right? And then you can use good data, good quality data to then actually find new opportunities, efficiencies in either processing or, client engagement, investment, performance and so forth. I think looking at the areas in which the access to empowered users, like a wider range of users to the data, will actually give you new business opportunities. I think it's a much more, not just real, but also much more palatable way to think about the investment as opposed to just like a cost saving. Because in a way, by using a cloud service, by basically moving to the cloud, it's almost like the cost savings part is a little bit like table stakes. You're going to get that, right? Go beyond that. Don't go beyond the cost savings and into the what can I do more, better? How can I, outrun my competition with using the power of my good quality data accessibility?
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Indeed, thank you to our audience for your questions and our speakers for your answers. And back to my questions, but first, our final audience poll. And the question is, what are the cultural changes of data democratization at your organization? And again, you can tick as many of the boxes as you like. And while you do that, let me come back and ask Sumi to tell us a little about the cultural challenges of data democratization and how to address these.
I think it's one thing is that you don't always have to have control and ownership of your silo or your product or your implementation area. It's definitely a very collective approach. And one thing I think I wouldn't talk about a whole lot is the privacy policies and compliance regarding that, because it's all intertwined. The governance, quality, democratization, it all requires some measure and control around what data we can and cannot share and encrypted and whatnot. And then that goes into a lot of different disciplines, functionally as well as technology organizations, that you have to work together to get this going. And so culturally, you may have been able to do certain thing and get it done very quickly if you didn't necessarily have to share all that you're doing. But now I think there's this collective community approach to implementations that's different, but I think beneficial ultimately.
Okay, Gary, coming to you on that one. Cultural challenges, what are you running into?
I think it's the worst cultural challenge is people holding on to what was theirs before. So going on to what Sumi was saying, the issue of this has always been my data. Why should I give it to you now? Why should I allow somebody else to come and look at it? looking again at the privacy stuff, we still need to consider things like GDPR here in the UK and the privacy regulations around the world around personal data, and making sure we're not sharing those bits. But I'm still finding that my biggest issue is this is mine and go away. You're not having it. It sits in my silo. I've always done it this way, and I'm always going to do it this way. I think the other side to that is the analytical community. We invest in analysts, we invest in data scientists. They are the experts in their field, and they don't really want somebody else coming and doing what they do. So I spend a lot of my time in the people place, just talking and understanding their concerns and trying to waylay them a bit in, we want our scientists doing science. We don't want them building an extract that somebody could go and take from a menu, as Francis mentioned earlier. So yeah, it's always going to be people for me.
Okay, may we see those last poll results then? And Gary, if you'd like to comment on these. Look, they don't want responsibility, but I see the other side of that as well in terms of, yeah, what do you think?
There is very much, and if I had somebody from my team on here today, they would tell you that the red line is the one that they're seeing. I think there's a difference in being responsible for data and then just giving up what they actually hold. And my point was very much around, I hold this, it's mine, you're not getting to see it. The bit that we're seeing is when you have got those data sets that sit over multiple locations, actually then going, right, who's the steward of this? I'll give a very quick example. We have a set of data sets that all start with the word credit, and we have a business team that are called credit, and they refuse to take on any of the data sets that actually start with the word credit. So yeah, we're very much seeing that out in Vanquis as to that taking responsibility. The gap between the leadership team, yep, the people at the top always want something yesterday, and they don't understand that these things take time to be built as well. And then we do move on to my point of holding their own and keeping it in one place. I would hope the last one, the lack of collaboration, are walls that are being broken down. I'm a governance practitioner at heart, and I go back to my first days under Larry English, where I was told that IT do not own the data. IT give us very nice little boxes to put our data in, but we make sure our IT team are part of our governance journey as well. So they do come along, they hold positions on our governance councils, and yeah, we need to start to break that one down, I think.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. And let me come back to you, Francis, to find out how firms can sustain democratization. Obviously, we've talked a lot about where to start, where to go. More volumes of data, more in different types of data, and more complexity. Will change need to be made as we go along?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's start with the data volumes, types, and complexity. And let's remember that data exists in your organization because you have a business need for it. It's part of it to be able to support your core activities. If you cannot support the increased volume of data, you won't be able to support your core business, period. I mean, it's going to stall. So you have to make sure that you can actually support the data itself. Then the volume, if we look at it from the democratization point of view, then it becomes a concept of, let's not try to boil the ocean. As I said earlier, find a starting point. What is the data set that will be the most useful? Right? And by that, I'm saying it has a use. Others will have asked for it. Like, is there a common set that there's a lots of use cases? People say, if I had access to this, I would be able to do this or do that. We would be able to update the business. Great. That's your number one item that you want to put into your system and democratize, and then build from that.
Okay, lovely. Sayori, what would you add there in terms of change going forward in the data, the complexity and so on?
Yeah, I think that if you start with a position where maybe like you feel like, yes, my data is democratized, how can I now keep that level of democratization or access going, you know, when data, just the volume, but also the types of data are going to increase substantially, and the data from structured and non-structured data sets are going to come in, and you want to deal with that. Like, how do you deal with that? And I hate to use this like kind of a canned answer, but I do think that embracing cloud is one way in which you can actually sustain democratization, with those increased volumes and diversity of data sets. And and it doesn't have to be one of those things where you kind of completely jump to cloud, and that's not just like a canned answer. What I mean, like, you could actually take a very measured journey towards that. And so when you can talk about, maybe first of all, it's just about making sure that you have your existing stuff that's managed and running on the cloud, right? Another step after that might be, you might actually want to go with a vendor or a partner that actually does it for you, or like the data governance as a service, basically the software as a service, or capability as a service on the cloud. All of these, I think, are steps that you can take towards actually being ready for the volume and the increase, without you having to actually be the one dealing with the auto scaling or the elasticity that's needed for the new data sets coming in.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And finally for today, I'd like to ask our expert speakers what guidance they'd give to practitioners working on data democratization. Sumi, please would you start here?
I keep thinking of leverage. There are a lot of point solutions that are really good out there. Identifying what they are and how that can be leveraged, and making sure you can connect the dots between these solutions that you can use and reuse and share. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be on the same technology, but as long as the data that is available for that can be used and reused by other people, and then it is needed by other folks, then getting that leverage item exposed out there with the right contextualization, I think is a really good way to start this journey.
Excellent, thank you. Gary, coming to you, what advice do you have for our audience?
I'm going to use the P word again, people. Very much start with and build a very good, strong data stewards network. Get the people in the organization that already know what's going on, what the data should be being used for, what data potentially is there. And then I'll come back to build that data catalog and make sure that that has everything that you need it to have in it. Maybe invest in the tooling around actually building that. And getting that in a good place. That's to me is the two best starting points.
Fab. Francis, from you.
The centralizing your data, the data cataloging, and that's the base, it's the core. Leveraging the cloud, automating as much as possible. Once you understand, you have a good grasp of what's there, automate it all, and so that you can just do more and more. But then always think about the user of the data. How will they discover the data? You catalog it all, present your catalog, present the details, and give them the ability to request the data, get access to it. And then when you deliver the data to them, think about how they're going to use it to try to minimize the effort that they have to do to transform the data before using it. Do they need to transfer it into their own cloud? Is it a legacy application that needs FTP access? Are they okay in using APIs? Are they using some of the new data processing, and you want to be able to share the data directly into a Jupyter notebook because it's an analyst? Ideally, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to support all of those, because the technology that you've put in place allows you to take your content, package it, and then present it out all there, and it's all automated.
Excellent. Sayori, some final words from you that the audience would like to hear.
Absolutely. So, in the kind of rush to democratize, please, be cognizant and careful about making sure that you have just enough of the guardrails that are going to make that democratization really work for your business. And I go back to the 4 things that I mentioned earlier: data catalog, which everybody already mentioned as well, data catalogs, data definitions or dictionaries, data quality, and then that data lineage perspective. I think thinking about those 4 things and in a way that it's like cloud first and cloud ready would be sort of the thing to get out of it and go out into a democratization program, thinking about those areas.
Excellent. And thank you. And thank you to all our speakers for sharing their experience and expertise. It's been a great conversation. Thank you too to TICSmith and S&P Global Market Intelligence for sponsoring today's webinar. Before we close, just a few AG Group items that may be of interest to you. If you scroll down your screen to additional options, you can sign up for our next webinar, which is on data standards and global identifiers. You can register for our ESG Insight briefing in New York, which is next week, or you can take a look at 18 Connect, a professional platform that we've developed that you can use to deliver your own events and webinars. That said, that's it for today. So thank you again to Sumi, Sayori, Francis, and Gary, and thank you to all of you who've taken part in the webinar. Please complete our feedback form. And as always, we are keen to hear your views and improve our products. Thanks again, and goodbye.